Welcome to Frequency. I'm Chuck Gose.
And I'm Jenni Field. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience, beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. Now, I'm going to kick things off today with a little chat about Coldplay at Astronomer, because as Chuck and I were talking before we recorded this episode, we decided that we couldn't let the week go by without talking about one of the most controversial stories, or one of the most talked about stories that seems to have hit the headlines over the last week. Now, for anyone that's missed it, it was the story about the CEO of Astronomer being caught on camera at a Coldplay concert with his arms around his chief HR officer. And there's been a lot of stories since then about the impact on the organization, the impact not so much on anything else, but the organization. I believe he has now resigned. But I think we can't have a podcast talking about workplace culture and leadership and comms and not talk about this. But I think we may have different views. So, Chuck, what's your view on things?
I actually want you to go first on this one.
That's okay. Thank you. We haven't. This is great. So I have a few thoughts on this. The first thought is how quick we are to take pleasure in other people's misery, which I think is a sad state of society, because the impact of this is huge. I'm also not sure how I feel about all of the memes coming out from some big brands. I feel like that's an interesting move from some places. From a leadership perspective, I find it interesting that the conversation has been very focused on the CEO and not the chief people officer, who is also in a leadership position. And that's kind of about as far as my thoughts go. What's also, I think, interesting, just in terms of how we do things now, is the fake statements that have been generated from, I think, the CEO and his wife. They all been fake, but I think it's interesting that people are doing that. Like, who has the time? So I have some questions about the leadership element and why there hasn't been any discussion about someone else that's also in a leadership position.
It is an interesting thing, and have so many thoughts around this, Jenny. I've actually made some notes.
Oh, he's putting on his glasses. It's serious.
This. So, one about you talking about us getting pleasure out of this. There on Pivot, the podcast with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, he talks about this. He talks about the word shame, and that it used to be something that people would avoid or turn their eyes away from, and now we seem to celebrate it and try to actually enjoy piling on with it, which I think says a lot about where we are as society and cultures and whatever other word, communities, whatever you want to throw into that we're almost reveling in it, not celebrating in it, but in a weird way profiting from it, but not from a financial standpoint, but from other ways, which is odd to me. And I think there's also this element around the disinformation and misinformation, whether it's the fake statements you talked about, or the fact that people keep talking about this moment as this like a kiss cam moment, and everybody's like, but none of these people actually have been to a Coldplay concert. So I have. It's not a kiss cam. That's not what Coldplay is doing at that point in time in the show. They're just highlighting concert goers. And then Chris Martin, who's the singer of Coldplay, like makes up some songs about the people that are on the camera. So sometimes they'll show families. When I was there, they showed sisters that were at the show. They showed Celine Dion at the show that I was on. So it's not a kiss cam, but because people keep talking about it, they just keep repeating the same thing over and over, and it's wrong. No different than people were sharing that, oh, the other woman on screen was their director of HR that was recently promoted. Well, that turned out to be false. Yet all these people are reveling in this attention that they're getting by trashing this moment on LinkedIn, and they don't really seem to care. And my now new favorite thing to do on LinkedIn is when I see people talking about Astronomer and this situation on there, and they'll start ripping into the CEO and the CHRO and all these things, and they're like, but I have such empathy for the families that are going through it. And I'm like, you don't. You know that you should, so you're saying that, but you don't, because if you did, you wouldn't be posting it in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just like, we know it's wrong to do it, so we're trying to back our way out of it. but it's still wrong. And then we're also highlighting the indiscretion of a few and trying to like wash the entire industry of it.
Yeah.
I have so enjoyed seeing, and this has largely been from the HR influencers that I follow, of seeing HR eating its own, like coming after this woman and criticizing her. And I'm like, man, you don't know.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know. And you're trying to say, like, well, this is why people don't trust HR. Okay,
Oh God.
HR influencers, this is not why people. They're not thinking, I wonder if my CHRO and CEO are in a romance. That's not why they don't trust HR. You can try to put all this on her. It's not going to stick. It's just not
Wow.
going to stick. So I think what's fascinating to me about this, despite my ongoing rant, let's just say the two of them had just acted normal. None of us would even know. None of us would even know that this was even going on. And did that impact the business of Astronomer? You and I don't know. No one else knows that. But now it has. Probably in some negative ways, but probably also in a lot of positive ways. I didn't
Mm.
know what who this company was. Now we do. Now how they're being talked about, maybe they don't like. But as I said, even bad PR can be good PR. So
Hmm.
it's a fascinating situation. I hate the way people are talking about it. I feel sorry for everyone involved. I really do. But like, I haven't made a single post about it because I'm like, man, that is none of my business.
No.
It is absolutely none of my business.
Yeah. And I think you and I are quite similar in I'm not going to comment on something that I don't know enough about. And I had this same feeling like during the pandemic when there was stuff going on and people were jumping on the bandwagon of shaming governments for slogans or how they were. And I was like, but we don't know who's behind. Like you just don't know enough to kind of just wade in with the shame bell that I just don't think is particularly helpful in our profession. But I do think it will be from a leadership perspective, I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of falls out from it for the organization and kind of where it goes. And like you, I do feel for everyone involved. And I still feel quite uncomfortable about kind of big brands getting involved in the meme thing. How have we got here from from a human being
Yeah.
perspective? Like, come on. Like, yeah.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
it's, and I also like that people were tagging these individuals in LinkedIn posts. And I'm
Wow.
like,
Okay.
what? Again, there's no empathy there.
No.
Yeah, if you're, it's not like this CEO and CHRO are like, oh, wait a minute, this person tagged me. I better go read what they
Yeah.
said. No, you're trying to drive people to their profiles
Yeah.
as if they're going to discover something new. I just think it
Yeah.
shows a lot of the immaturity of people of not understanding the gravity of the situation and trying to get likes and clicks and whatever off of it. And I
Yeah.
just, that to me is almost the real shame of it all.
Yeah. That's the ick, isn't it? Okay. Enough about that. What are your articles for the week?
Before we get to our first story, we've got a string of headlines this week that all paint a vivid picture of today's workplace. Things like a workforce is stressed, outspoken, and increasingly skeptical of what leaders are selling. We'll hear how employees are overwhelmed by the relentless pace of change and why HR is now being told to make disruption feel almost routine, which I thought was interesting. We'll dig into Dell's latest feedback program where workers didn't hold back on telling leadership exactly how they feel. We'll talk about a surprising red flag for spotting a bad boss that might be happening more often than you think. And then we'll wrap it up with this real driver behind return to office mandates. Jenni, you thought you could get this out. You thought we'd be done with this. We are not. Back to return to office mandates. And spoiler, Jenni, it's not culture that's driving this. But first, let's start with a bit of a lighter question that hit LinkedIn this week. Are communicators themselves sometimes too judgy? On LinkedIn, Louise Thompson sparked a conversation about whether communicators are a little too quick to judge, whether it's leaders, peers, or even each other. Her point, are we unintentionally undermining the very trust and influence we're supposed to build? It's a call to self-awareness in a profession that often critiques before it connects. And I really felt like, Jenni, this aligned quite nicely with my freak out last week, where I talked about communicators creating AI imagery and the hypocrisy of then criticizing AI written content. So, Jenni, do you think this judginess is a real issue in comms, or is it just the nature of the job to be critical by default?
So I I really liked this post from Louise because it's come at a time where I feel like the comms profession is at its judgiest on platforms like LinkedIn. And I felt that it's something we can probably all reflect on. And I think in the post, Louise kind of reflects on her own journey in that. And I have my own version of that, where I can see where in my past as a junior comms professional, how I might have been too quick to have judged. And I think the more senior you become, the more you understand actually some of that broader gray area, the broader context, and all the things that you don't know often as a more junior member. So I think the judginess is a real issue because I think there is like a purist nature sometimes for communicators where we very much want things in a nice neat box and tied up with a bow, and we're not comfortable with some of the gray. I think there's a lack of knowledge around business acumen, which has been talked about in the industry for decades, about the inability to understand business, how it works, and how communication fits in within that. And I think therefore we're too quick to think something's going on when it's something else. We're asking the difficult questions and we're trying to get underneath stuff. And that can come across as critical, but I think that's all in your delivery and how you do it. And I think as you grow and develop, you learn not to do that like you're just shoving a big stick at someone. And you learn how to do it in a way that is softer and supportive. And I think there is a critical nature to what we do by the fact that we are questioning and we want to understand something. But I think sometimes that goes into the critical of what someone's doing versus that kind of curious, critical questioning, if that makes sense.
I think that I think there's a difference between being critical and judging, because I think judging is you're almost building in this assumption as
Mm,
part of it, whereas critical could be you're trying to dig into the pieces. And I think we celebrate judginess. We reward it in algorithms. We see this where people are creating content not to get a point across, but to simply get attention for themselves. And so I think this judginess is actually paying off externally for some, but I think internally, no one likes to be judged.
yeah.
No one's like, yes, please judge that. I think again, that's where the difference is between critical. There was another post this week on LinkedIn that referred to this term as like shadow communicators inside organization. I'm like, and I actually commented, I was like, I need to think about that term. And I think why I pause to think is because it comes across kind of judgy. Like we're placing a judgment on people that maybe aren't communicators in title, but are actively communicating inside an organization. I'm like, and we're kind of judging that even just by calling it that. And so it's like it's caused me to reflect sometimes in the language and the semantics of what we're doing. And we do like to judge
Mm,
things, even if we know that it's not perhaps the healthiest route to take.
mm. And it made me think about some of the work I've done on credibility because if I when I talk to comms teams about how to build their credibility in the organization and we go through the 8 practices, one of those is being supportive. Now, my credibility work is more in the leadership space, but I've done sessions with comms teams on it because it's relevant for different groups.
Hmm?
And this supportive bit is the bit that this links to for me. And it's the bit that I can see the comms teams kind of starting to understand how you have to be supportive as a leader in communication, which essentially you are as a professional, if you like, and not a shadow communicator, then you have to be supportive, which means that you have to be inclusive, you have to make people feel safe, and you have to create that space for them to not know. And I don't know that communicators often do that. I think we're too quick to go, oh, they haven't brought us in at the right time and they're not doing it right, or they just want to do this. But where's that supportive practice as a leader in communications that's going to help people not feel rejected, that feel like you've got them and you're with them? And I think we're so quick to focus on the task and the solution because we know best that we forget some of these leadership skills that we really, really have to develop when we want to influence
I
others.
think there's the coaching element to that I think often gets missed, because coaches coach. They work with people to make them better. They practice and all that. They're not sitting back and just saying, here's
Mm.
what you did wrong. Our next article, I will admit, I had to make sure that it wasn't from The Onion, at first. Uh, the headline was, with employees stressed by disruption, HR must lead the charge in, quote, routinizing change, as in routine.
That's not a word.
Work, I know, but we're going to go with it. Work Life reports that employees are hitting a breaking point with constant change. A recent survey they cite shows that more than 60% of workers feel overwhelmed by the pace of organizational shifts, and it's leading to disengagement and burnout, which we've talked about before. The recommendation was the part that I had to make sure was not an onion piece. HR leaders need to normalize change, making it predictable, structured, and almost routine so that it feels less like chaos and more like evolution. But there's a fine line between normalizing change and making exhaustion permanent. Jenni, do you see how communicators working alongside HR can help employees navigate this constant churn without it feeling like they're living in a permanent state of disruption and chaos?
So this strikes to the heart of my world when I talk about taking people from chaos to calm. I mean, I have some questions around the 60% feel overwhelmed, and therefore that leads to disengagement and burnout. I would question that the pace of the organizational shifts is specifically what's leading to disengagement and burnout, because I think it's actually the lack of narrative and strategy that the organization has that's doing that. Because if you're going through change and if you're going through lots of different change elements, all of that should be linked to the organizational strategy and you should be able to tell that story. It's that lack of story that's contributing to this, because this is what I see with clients at the moment is exactly this. It's like, what's the narrative? How are we telling the whole story? How does it hook together? How does it link back to your values? How does it link into theory of change? Like, all of these things are, that work isn't being done. And that's the bit that is impacting. So as communicators, I mean, if HR are picking up this baton, and I'm not sure that they are, even though they're being told they must lead the charge, but it's our job to look at that narrative and how we're telling that story and joining everything up so that it's very clear how it all fits together. I think the risk at the moment is that even if we may want to do that, I don't think leadership teams are doing the work to articulate that and spend the time to figure out how it all fits together. And we're being too reactive to things that are going on. And that's the link for me. It's the narrative, because people are exhausted by change. We know this from other research that's happened this year. I think Gallagher's State of the Sector talks about change quite a lot in there as well. But so that is happening. And we talked about change fatigue and strategy fatigue in one of our very early episodes, and that difference. But it's the story for me. Story,
Yeah.
narrative, strategy, whichever word you want to use, it's the knitting together of everything behind an overarching purpose that's missing.
Yeah, I'm doing a couple events coming up in the next few months with HR leaders, so I'm probably building my fan base now when I say this. It HR is not going to do that narrative. They're
No.
just they're not. And they could do that within some of the things that they are doing, perhaps, but that's not happening already. So why do we think all of a sudden HR is a solution to all of this? They're not. I don't really have much else to add to that. Then they're just not.
No, no, but it's I don't know how they've come to that conclusion, because for me, it's the whole leadership team. If I think about some work that I'm doing with clients at the moment, which is linked to some of this around lots of different change elements and bringing it together, and it might be that is HR that have come and had that conversation, but you're working with the whole leadership team. So maybe the leading the charge is that they need to go and find the people to come and help, and maybe that's how it gets pulled in. But I certainly don't see it like you, that HR should be doing this, because the change that's going on in organizations, this for me almost implies that it's all people change or
Right.
cultural change. And actually, that's not the case at all. There's so many other elements of things that are going on that if you just go, look, HR can deal with that, then I'm not sure that's the right solution at all, because this has to be a leadership team and it has to be the CEO that's really pushing it.
Next up, an article, employees were happy to, quote, tell Dell that things are not okay. One, I was just great to hear that Dell's still around. I hadn't heard the name Dell in a very long time, which congratulations. I remember back when the dude, you need a Dell commercials. Like,
Yeah.
amazing. Well done, Dell. But their latest employee survey, Tell Dell, produced some really tough headlines for the company. A significant share of employees reported declining morale on frustration with company priorities, with remote work policies, meaning there isn't any, and workload topping the complaints. Dell's chief HR officer says they're taking action, but the survey results make it clear listening is the easy part. What employees really care about, as we all know with surveys, is what comes next. So, Jenni, when a company gets feedback this raw, from your expertise, what is the smartest way for leaders and communicators to not just acknowledge it, but show progress quickly enough to rebuild trust?
So I think you've got to invest in this, and whether it's investing in the time, so putting together people in the organization that can address this and kind of seconding them over to looking at it, or investing in external help to come and fix it, whatever works, right? It's time, and it's focusing your energy and attention in this area of the organization. I think what I would want to be looking at is the fact that we're seeing, they've said they've reported that declining morale, the frustration is company priorities, remote work policies or lack thereof, and workload. So there's a lot to get underneath there in terms of what does that mean, what's happening. And I think you've got to explore that a bit more while you're also working with the leadership team to say, what are the priorities? And let's get clarity on that. And this isn't unique to Dell. Again, another client I've
Mm-hmm.
just finished working with, one of the things came out there was there's too many priorities. And actually, really boring fact, but if you look at the history of the word priority, it was never pluralized until more recently because you can't have more than one. That's the whole point. But we've kind of just made up the word priorities so that we can have 6 and 10. But that lack of clarity around what do you want me to do first is what's paralyzing for people. So I would be doing a deeper dive on what's underneath those things. And then I'd also be working with the leadership team to define what the priorities really are and really looking and testing that as to what's really important for the overall mission objective, what we're trying to achieve. And I think you've got to communicate that investment is happening. Either these are the people or we're bringing in some support. And then you've got to have regular updates about what's happening. Like any change program, really, for me, that would be how I would be having those regular updates about what's going on in a specific place that was very dedicated for that and keeping the conversation open. I think that's the big thing is don't just say, oh, okay, we've had all this feedback. Let's just close the doors and hide in this office and come up with all the solutions and then come back out. That conversation, when you look at any change model, always includes that continuous kind of feedback listening loop so that you're kind of testing as you're going.
Yeah, I think with any kind of change, I always think about like the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Where as you're changing, there's going to be things that you're going to learn that need to be different. So you might pull back a little bit,
Mhm.
but you can still tell the story of the 1 step forward that you made.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of these employees with Dell, for example, where they did have this remote work policy and then are now one of the companies that is like, no, we actually don't do that anymore. You have to come in the office every day. That actually feels like 3 steps back
Yeah.
for employees because they made what they felt like progress in one area, but now it actually feels worse than probably it did prior to the 2 steps forward. Now I feel like we're doing like this tango dance of like steps forward and back. So I guess this is one of those examples of, yes, if you're going to go out and get feedback from employees, that's good. We obviously don't have a list of all the questions that were asked. And if employees told you this and it's pretty damning what they shared, now what? And I think that's what employees
Yeah.
are probably waiting for. And also what can they do now is the ultimate
Yeah.
question that I guess we all want answered.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see what they do next and whether there's any reporting about that action taken or if we're just reporting on the misery. Because I'd be interested to see if there is that follow up and then what's happened. And maybe it's a question to reach out to the HR director who's quoted in the article, maybe in a few months to say, look, we talked about this on the podcast. We'd love to know what you've been doing so we can kind of close that loop, just to really add
Mhm.
some pressure for some action.
The next up, the number one red flag that someone is a bad boss, according to a workplace expert, is that sometimes you want a job so badly that you ignore that they're a bad boss. CNBC spoke with workplace experts about what really signals a bad boss, and it's not shouting or micromanaging. It's a lack of respect for employees' time. Things like late night emails, last minute meeting cancellations, and a constant expectation of availability are more demoralizing than we often admit. The piece also notes that many employees ignore these warning signs because they're desperate for a job or a paycheck, making them more vulnerable to toxic managers. Jenni, do you see this as just another bad boss stereotype, or does it reflect a deeper problem with power dynamics and maybe a chance for communicators to help employees and leaders realign expectations?
So I was really interested in this article. So I went and had a proper sort of read through it to see what they were talking about. And the lack of respect for employees' time is something I always find quite interesting, even if you take out employees and just say anyone's time, because I am a big one for time. I like to make sure we're on time. I like to make sure that if we've agreed to something, it's happening. So this all speaks to me, and I'm going, absolutely, this is everything. But I've worked with teams from different parts of the world where time isn't that important. And I think this is quite a fixed view. And I would be interested to know how this translates in different cultures, because
Hmm.
I know that time in some cultures, as I said, just isn't as important. What this made me think about as well was the conversation we had the other week about responsiveness, and how that's kind of the big leadership trait that really makes you a great leader, is that you are responsive. And this feels like it links into that a bit. So
Mm-hmm.
you're responsive, you're, communicating well, all of those things. So it does feel, for me, it feels a bit like a stereotype. I think the power dynamics are never talked about enough in organizations. I think we try and shy away from that and think, oh, there's no hierarchy here, or we've got an entrepreneurial spirit, or whatever phrase you want to use to try and pretend that there's no power dynamic. There is, there always is. And I don't think that's addressed enough. But I think it's, from a communications perspective, I think it's a chance to think about how you help shape the culture around things like time and last minute emails or whatever it might be. Because we've worked with clients where we've looked at sort of productivity, which is a word I now hate, so I use in quotes, but we've looked at how you structure your meeting. So they're 45 minutes, but they're an hour blocked in. So you've got time either side for people to make their way in. And so then if people are late, they're not really late because the meeting doesn't start till a bit later. So it's how do you support that culturally as a communication professional in terms of how you structure stuff, how you communicate that, um, and how you get involved. The only other thing that this makes me also go a bit about is I've had interviews with bosses who have checked their watches and the other person in the interview fell asleep. And I remember that interview well because it was my third interview, I think, where the main interviewer, who would be my boss, checked her watch and the ops director fell asleep. Now, I got that job and I worked in that organization for a long time. And I learned that the HR person was just very quick to judge. So she'd made her mind up very quickly and almost was like, I don't need to have the rest of this conversation. Like, we've
Mm-hmm.
been going 10 minutes. I've made my decision. And the ops director always fell asleep in meetings and had to go and have some tests and sort his health out. So I think sometimes you can make these things red flags and what do they mean? But I had some of the best times in my career in that job. And if I'd read this article, I'd probably be reading into all of that behavior that wasn't true. And I just think it's important to have balance and not just
Mm-hmm.
stereotype.
Yeah. I think the time element is fascinating because it's the like two of my I'll use one of your words, Jenni, two of my bugbears here is one, like when people start a meeting and they're like, we're gonna wait a couple minutes to let people join. No, 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 no. No, no, no. We're here. Like if someone else isn't, that's on them. Like we're here. You said the meeting starts at 10. Let's start. Someone isn't here. We're not wait. What are we waiting for? So that's one. The other one is like when people at the end of a meeting will be like, "Hey, we're gonna wrap up. I'm gonna give you 5 minutes of your time back." No, no, no. This isn't you. You didn't own that time. That was my time. You're not giving me anything back. So, but I think there's this leadership mentality around who actually does own the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking back through, I've had the privilege of truly working with a lot of great leaders and a few that aren't and weren't great leaders. And a lot of this did resonate with me when they don't make the relationship a priority,
Yeah.
when they feel like you're at their beck and call, that they're the one in charge. And you're right, the power dynamics, I think, come into play. I get a bit frustrated when I hear the industry saying things, we're not order takers, we're oracles. Guess what? Everybody takes orders. Even your CEO is
Mm-hmm.
taking orders. So maybe that's some of the judginess coming out a little bit, but like we all take orders from someone,
Yeah.
period. You may not want to do that all day long and you want to have your input. That's great. But I do think that the time element here is that piece. And I think the other part, we talked about the job market last week. And I made the mistake as I was reading this I talked to an ecology member who recently joined because I always offer up time to meet new members. And they're actively looking for a new role while they're in their role. And I was like, wow, now is the time to look for your next opportunity because you have a paycheck. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, if you're hating where you are, is the paycheck then enough? Like, is that actually worse for you than just saying like, look, I'm out, I'm going to go look for a job. I get that
Yeah.
few of us are independently wealthy. I'm certainly not. So you need income. But even there, I was saying like, no, you got a paycheck, hang out until
Yeah.
you find the next best thing, where maybe the best thing is to get out because you don't feel like you're valued there.
Yeah. It's a fine balance, isn't it? And this is what I think about articles like this is there's so much context that's different around the individual, about what you need to feel valued and supported at work, whether it's just the paycheck, where, all these things are different for us individually, wherever we are in the world. So saying like, this is the one thing that makes someone a bad boss, I mean, it's probably a bit clickbaity, isn't it? And I've fallen for it again.
Yeah.
You've done it again.
Yeah. And last up, Jenny, one of your favorite topics. I'm so glad I found this article. It's the real reason your boss wants you back in the office. Investopedia is peeling back the curtain on return to office mandates, arguing that despite what companies say about collaboration and culture, that the real motivator is office real estate costs. Corporations with long-term leases and expensive buildings want to see those desks filled, whether or not in-person work actually drives, your favorite word, Jenny, productivity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder that the official story employees hear is often more about optics and financials than engagement or teamwork. So, Jenny, how can communicators balance honesty with loyalty to leadership when the real reasons behind policies like this aren't exactly employee friendly? And what does this say about our authenticity discussion last week?
So just to point out for anyone that hasn't listened to the conversations in the past about why I don't want to talk about this anymore, is because I feel like we're just going round in circles. And I'm very much a person of to what end. And I feel like we're just going round and round in circles with this return to office, which is why I get frustrated. What's interesting to me is I said last week that I was listening to this culture shock book that I'd picked up from the Gallup stuff that we were talking about, and I'm still listening to it. And it does say that there's no benefit culturally to being in an office to not being in an office. There's no correlation that shows that being in that office environment helps with culture. So I do think we're just not being honest enough. And I think that we had this conversation, I think, last week about honesty, transparency,
Mm-hmm.
like just be honest, right? And I think we're too quick to try and come up with spin or a reason why, or it's about culture. But this also comes back to why I now don't enjoy the word productivity, because I have yet to find someone who can define that for office-based workers. What is productive? Like, what is it? What is it that you're really measuring? Because I guarantee you that you haven't articulated that, and therefore this doesn't work. So I think there is a need to be honest and say, look, we've invested in this office building. We've invested in it for the next 5 years. So we need to use it. But this is how we're going to do that differently to how it was before the pandemic. Because the best examples I've seen of return to office from other people that I've heard speak at conferences have talked about the purposefulness of coming back to the office and the specifics around doing things together and connecting and focusing on that human time and not just coming and sitting in a cubicle connected to headphones on a computer and having Teams or Zooms calls all day. So I think that's the bit for me. And I think it does link a bit into the authenticity conversation we had last week, because I think we're trying to polish things in a way that doesn't make sense. Like, we've seen loads of articles about return to office. There was another one this week that was, we're now going back, even though we'd committed to a hybrid policy, but there was no reason given about why we're going back. And so people just make up their own stories. And that's what annoys people, is you're not giving me agency or autonomy, and you're not being honest and truthful. And that's just going to piss me off. So
Hmm.
just be open about it and say, we've made an investment, we have to use it, but we're going to use it differently. I think that's, you're trying to still do the same thing you were doing in 2018. That isn't going to work.
Yeah, this is an example of where I wish leaders would just be adults and say what you just shared. Hey, 5 years ago, if we'd have known what this world was going to be like, we wouldn't have signed that 10-year lease. But
Yeah.
guess what? We did. And so we're now committed to using that space. We need to use that space, blah, 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 blah. But I still think it's fascinating that, like, you're already committed to that cost. So whether or not people come in or not doesn't change the cost. In fact, it actually probably costs you more
Yeah.
if people come in, because then you have other utilities and everything going on. And, I've heard what you sort of alluded to. I've heard these stories where people are coming in and then just sitting on Teams calls all day, because that's the way we got used to working in corporate
Oh,
America or corporate EMEA or wherever you are in the world. So I think it's that I wish, to your point, we talked about last week, just be honest for the reasons why. Even if how great would it be if you're an employee, and we talked about this, I think, from a financial, I don't remember if it was Chase or somebody like that said, they came out and said, we actually don't think you're working enough at home.
mm,
I need to see you in the office. As brutal as that is, and as maybe awful as that was to hear, I felt like he was being honest.
yeah.
And we talked about the dangers of authenticity. Like, what if your leaders actually are being authentic and you don't
Yeah.
like it? Well, you got it.
Yeah.
But at least I think it was Jamie Dimon, I think, who came out. Like, at least
Yeah.
he's being honest with it. And so I think that's what employees want. Then at least you're basing it off of the truth,
Yeah.
instead of some sort of fluffy scenario like, we want everybody back together and kumbaya and, all of those things. It's just, people need to be adults
Yeah.
here.
And I think it's that not the brutal honesty of it, but if you're going to say, like, we're not getting enough done, or we're not achieving what we need to achieve, so I want to bring us back to the office and test whether that's going to make a difference. And if it makes
Yes.
a difference, then it's going to prove the fact that we do need to be here. But put some kind of measurement or outcome or success criteria around it that we as employees can test and be on board with and help with
Hmm.
that. Because we can help test that and see if it does, and if it makes a difference, then great. Like, I've heard a
Right.
lot of stories that show it does make a difference. Things do get done quicker. It means you're able to achieve more. And I think that sort of success criteria probably isn't articulated enough.
Jenny, that wraps up the stories I selected this week. What is your freak out this week?
So I didn't really have one until I saw my dad earlier today. And we were discussing an email that we'd got, and I got on a bit of a rant about it, and I was like, this is my this is my freak out today. So we'd got an email from someone that, and in that email where they were answering some questions, they'd said, my understanding is dot dot dot. And I think I feel like this how you feel about that. I hope this email finds you well. Because when you say my understanding is this, my question is it, do you know this? Or is it just that this is what you've interpreted? Because it feels like a real sort of get out of jail free card of, well, that was my
Mm,
understanding, but I, you know, didn't actually check anything, and I've just made this up because I haven't bothered to ask. And it just feels, I just don't like it. I'm like, you either know it or you don't know it, or you need to go and find out. But my understanding is just makes me feel a bit irritated.
yeah. No, I don't know that I've gotten those emails, but for those listening, Jenny now gets a screenshot of every email I receive that begins with, I hope this finds you well.
Yeah. And
Because
likewise, I send them back to you when I
I
get them,
know,
and it's
I know.
now a thing.
It's now a thing. My freak out this week is around this video that I saw, and from Stephen Bartlett, who hosts the Diary of a CEO series. I just thought it was really bad advice. And I have a lot of respect for the content he creates and the presence that he has and a lot of the other ideas, but not this idea. And was talking from a financial perspective, and he told this story, which I'm just going to assume is true, where he took his team out to lunch and it cost $100 to take your team out to lunch. But then he started to question it of like, well, in 40 years, if I had invested that $100, it would now be $5,000. And so really it's not a $100 decision, it's a $5,000 decision, and questioning like the decisions that you make around investments. And I'm like, that's so dumb. It's so dumb. If we made every decision based off, well, what is this going to be in 40 years? Some you absolutely should. Should I go to college or not? That's a great 40-year discussion. Should I buy a house? Potentially. Doesn't mean you have to hold on to it for 40 years, but that's the kind of thing like, yes, like, do I want to, and not am I taking my team to lunch and oh, now it's a $5,000 lunch. Because if you'd have invested that $100 and blah, 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 I'm like, oh, I just hated it. I got so annoyed watching that because I think now the people listening to that would be like, yep, I better just invest and not invest in that money in myself and not invest in other people. And if I was one of his employees, I'd be like, come on, dude, it was $100 lunch.
Yeah.
And you're exasperating this into like a $5,000 investment decision. Enough.
Like, it's just the epitome.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. And it's like the epitome of just absolute nonsense. Like, no, there's not, you can't quantify those two things together. I just was like, what a load of tosh.
Yeah. Oh, that's a new one. Okay, I'm going to steal a load of tosh. I'm going to steal that one too. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us this week. All the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes, and please do not forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and pass this along to someone you think would enjoy listening or watching, because you can now find Frequency on YouTube as well. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing the music to the show. We'll be back next week with more news, insights, and opinions about everything comms and leadership and workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.